Welcome to Pause and Pivot Cafecito Chats. I'm Margarita V, and I'm here with my amazing co-hosts, Archana and Colin. And today we're diving into a powerful book, Yoga and the Quest for the True Self by Stephen Coate. And in this conversation, you're going to want to join in because we're going to be exploring these three big ideas. And note, this is just part one of two. So we plan to spend at least 2 weeks on this book. Something about number one, like why it's not about we're broken, that misconception of feeling like we're broken to we're just misidentified. And number two, how we can get caught up in what he calls the identity project. So we'll go into that idea of identity project and what we're moving into. And number three, how even discomfort can become a doorway back to ourselves. So just noticing what's landing for you, which one of those stand out for you. If you've ever felt like something is missing, even when life looks fine on the outside, today's conversation may be a really great spot for you to just pause and join the conversation on Cafecito Chats. So, Urchina and Colin, let me just say a warm hello. I'm so glad that you're here for this conversation. Urchina, I know, in the culture that you're from, yoga is a part of life. So I'd love to just get an idea of what are you most excited to dive into for today? Any initial ideas that you're curious to explore?
Um, I actually did not grow up with yoga in my Indian family. So I'm a latecomer to yoga. And I tried it and am still exploring it. And I think I owe you gratitude for reintroducing me to it and actually changing my framework around yoga, and especially with this book. So, I'm excited to discuss it here and
Yes,
explore further.
I
Thank
love
you.
that. Yes, and I love what you said that, even in your own culture, we're in India. Yoga comes from India, right? And many other different cultures in the world. But so many of my friends from India say the same thing. But when we say yoga, we're going to talk about that it's not just the hatha yoga. It's a whole lifestyle. So I can't wait to clarify some of these ideas, right? That even we were ourselves have around yoga and doing yoga or living yoga. So for that reason, this is such a gem of a book. I've added it as one of my core books. So imagine if I had a book bag, this would be one of those that I would just carry around with me all the time, right? Thank you, Archana. Okay, and Colin, any initial ideas? I'd love to just see what's coming up for you. What's a curiosity for this book for you?
Well, you've been how long? We've done what, 2 months of this now,
This is
Maggie?
our ninth book.
Nice. Yeah. And this is the first time I decided I was going to read the book. Uh, I've been I've been reading this book because to your point, yoga, which is one of the things that when I broke out of my Western minded traditional upbringing, yoga and union and the Indian culture was something that I immersed myself into. I ended up within my first few years of seeking my own path, initiated into an ashram in Honesdale, Pennsylvania, and really thinking that that was the path I was going to walk. Had my mala beads and was doing my japa and all those things, and never read the Gita. And as soon as I saw the book and realized what it was going to be presenting, I was like, oh my God, here's my chance. And all I can say is it's magical. I'm really, really enjoying this. So once again, my dear friends, thank you.
We've done our goal already. We can just close the shop today, close the cafecito chat. We've done our job. So we are here to just share the joy of books. That is our love, one of our love languages, right? So just joining together and here in this space, it's not just about reading the books on our own. It's the magic that happens when we come together and exchange ideas, share different perspectives, not just from our different cultures, but from our lived experiences. So thank you both for being here every week. It's an absolute joy to be in this space with you, this thought development space where we just share, and it's an absolute joy. So for today and this week, we're going to be focusing on this book, Yoga and the Quest for the True Self. And I'm really, really excited to return to this book. So I read this book like 6 years ago, and it's about, 330 pages. So it took me about 10 hours, maybe a little bit more, but it's only because I go back. And again, one of my spirituality practices is to underline books, right? And I underline a book with a different color pencil every time I read it. So I see what different insights and ideas, pop out at me. So it was amazing to read it again and to see it with new eyes. So for today, we're going to dive into this amazing book. And again, I read it like 6 years ago. It just shifted my understanding of yoga, right? From what I thought was just the pretzel poses that we do on the mat, and that it was just a physical practice. So this book is going to show us much deeper, the philosophy, the psychology, and really, it's a path of self understanding. And as I've been rereading it now, it feels more relevant now, especially in the world we're living in today with the division and uncertainty and fear. It's spinning us out of our inner center, right? And its extroverted nature. So, as many of us are navigating through this time of stress, constant input from our beautiful phones and televisions and stuff, maybe even a feeling of pressure to perform. We talked about that last time, right? And we're talking about the Latinas Bible and culture and how we are shaped by our environment and people and such. So, why is this book so relevant now, especially with the advent of AI and all of that information and knowledge that is now so easily accessible? How is all of this continuing to shape how we think and how we show up? And something really, really important. This book is going to bring us back to ourselves. So, stopping the noise by not adding more, but by remembering what's already there. And something I've been reflecting on recently is that it's not enough, again, like we said, to read the books. Just a few days ago, I was saying, I can't wait to talk about this book because I can underline and do all these things, but if it stays just within me, then that knowledge is not lived. It hasn't had the breath because we haven't shared it with others. So more and more, I'm seeing this return to this format of like a literary cafe, the importance of the connection, right? We've talked about horizontal connection, but also vertical connection, how that connects us and plugs us into what is most authentic in ourselves and through others. The magic of this space with you, my friends, here is that we are mirrors to each other. And the book goes and talks about it. So, okay, I can go on and on. Let's get into this to just say if you're here, it's because we value the experience of exchanging these ideas in conversation together because we hear different perspectives when something resonates, when we allow ourselves to then pause and reflect together. And that, my friends, is the difference of this space where wisdom starts to come alive in your unique lifescape. So thank you for joining. We're not here just to learn ideas, but to share and to bring about living and exploring these ideas together. So before I start with the book review and the author review, my friends, any other ideas coming up for you before we get
Just
going?
that you as this process has evolved, because I think about it, and it's a definite evolution. It's so interesting to me how it kind of, if you think about it, Maggie, what's happened is kind of similar to some of the stories he shares in the book. Some of these humans who start out thinking they're on their dharmic path, and they've got it in their mind, or they're somehow making things happen the way they think they're supposed to go, and yet they end up landing right where they're supposed to be. And I just feel that in you right now. I really do.
There is something happening right now. I am the stuff that we are reading and going to share in this book are coincidentally the same ideas and concepts that I am reviewing in another program with Claire Zammit. She's like an amazing teacher, one of my teachers. I consider it an honor to be studying under her. And so the same ideas, the same words within a day or two of each other that are applying to how we're living in today's world. So thank you for picking up on that, Colin. And we always try to share why this book matters. How is it relevant to today? Just because something is ancient or old doesn't mean it does not have current value or meaning. The magic is how we apply it, make it relevant. I love it. And so, my friends, as always, we want to encourage you to get out your worksheet. So, if you subscribe to our newsletter, you get this handy dandy little tool, which is just to say, how am I going to pay attention to ideas that matter to me and jot them down? So, by the end of the talk, you'll have some ideas of one action that you might be able to consider of something new to start, or maybe something that isn't serving you, something like a kryptonite little dust or particle that's draining you of energy or something, and you want to stop that. So, first, our practice is awareness, right? And then with our breath and our space together, we learn to identify those opportunities of where we can pivot. So the pause here is gathering together to exchange information and ideas and new perspectives. The breath is this space, the gap, right, of where we are right now in our life and kind of orienting and getting a sense of where we can be, where our potentialities lie. And the C is choice. What are we going to do about it? And it's not enough to know. We're in an era where we have to live in action, my friends. So with that, let's get started with a little overview of this amazing book, Yoga and the Quest for the True Self. So, starting with big idea number one for Yoga and the Quest for the True Self, a book by Stephen Cope. This book really serves as a bridge. There's many ways we can look at it, but it's a bridge between yoga, psychology, and meaning. So, one of the key ideas that comes out in this book is a concept that Stephen refers to as the difference between a true self and the false self. It's a version of what shaped us by roles, expectations, achievements, and external validation, the identity we build over time. So, just an understanding, am I living in my true self or my false self? And while it can be functional, even successful, it often leaves us feeling like something is missing. So the true self, on the other hand, is described as something deeper, more stable, more authentic, and already whole. And the journey of yoga in this context is not about becoming someone new. It's actually more about remembering who we are beneath all of that. And another important thread in this book is how Cope reframes suffering. This is huge in our space, right? We always bring this back to Viktor Frankl's work and how we look at what life brings at us. So in this book, instead of seeing discomfort, disappointment, or even crises as something to avoid, he suggests that these moments can actually be doorways, as invitations to look beneath the surface and reconnect with something more real. And finally, what makes this book especially powerful is that it integrates Eastern philosophy. We'll get into that. They're called the Shadarshans, right? Eastern philosophy. And also Western psychology. So if you're not already up on the latest books on positive psychology, you will, because we're going to spend a lot of time in this space on that. And then he also integrates real lived experience. So, how are we blending the Eastern philosophy, Western psychology, and our lived experience? And this book doesn't stay abstract. Some of the beautiful parts about this book is it's more of a story of his life and reflections of the stories of his friends and this place that we're going to get to know called Kripalu, where they do yoga. And he shares ways that we can actually apply. So for me, this book really connects to the idea of returning to our center, to our core, coming back to a deep sense of self clarity and meaning in the midst of everyday life. Okay. So there's so much to unpack. And let's dive in now to the author. So, Stephen Cope brings a really unique and important perspective to this work. He is both a longtime yoga teacher and a trained psychotherapist, which means he has a deep understanding of both the Eastern and Western approaches to human development. He spent many years as a senior teacher and scholar at the Kripalu Center for Yoga and Health, which is one of the largest and most respected yoga and wellness centers in the United States. And that's important because his work is not just theoretical or philosophical, right? It's grounded in decades of teaching, observing, and guiding people through real life transformation. And what makes his voice especially compelling is that he doesn't just present yoga as something abstract or idealistic. He presents it as something deeply practical, a way to understand maybe why we suffer in life, how we may get disconnected from ourselves, and what it actually takes to come back into alignment. So, again, through deeply practical, reflective, personal, as well as applying it to the human condition. He also wrote other books. One of my other favorite ones called The Great Work of Your Life, which we may actually review in one of our upcoming sessions. And that book focuses more explicitly on Dharma, right? Or your purpose and how we live in alignment with what we're here to do. But earlier in the book, you will really see the foundation of his thinking, his life, and the precipice of what got him to dive deep into yoga. And not just yoga practices, but yoga as a lifestyle. So, overall, Stephen Cope, thank you for helping us to understand that as it's human to have challenges to face, like stress, identity, daily struggles, and a sense of disconnection, that these are not random. And as we share very often, it's common humanity to have these struggles. And as Viktor Frankl would remind us, these are the signals and signs of the more awakened individual who is ready to step into consciousness and to make those conscious choices. So, we're here in this book to talk about the deeper part of the human pattern. Just amazing. And so, just to give a little bit of an idea of where we're going today for the big three ideas, again, just parts 1 and 2 of the book, we'll dive into these ideas and share and reflect together. The quick overview, the first one is the idea that we are not broken. The main problem is that we are just misidentified. So it's shifting from seeing ourselves as that broken or something's wrong with us and how we're defining ourselves by our roles, expectations, and external measures. And the second one is what he describes as the difference between the identity project and what we're calling in this book the reality project. Okay, so we're going to look at the differences in that. The shift from trying to construct who we are to actually seeing and living from what is true. And the third one is a powerful reframe. We love to reframe around suffering and to now view suffering as not something to be avoided, but that it can, in fact, serve as a threshold, a doorway. And in this book, we actually look at the body as the first space to go to pass through that threshold. So instead of something to avoid, it's something to invite into that deeper awareness. In this process, going through the gateways, we go back to ourselves through the body, through the breath, the sensation, the direct experiences. So, which of these are landing with you? Which one are you most curious to get into? We'll take each of these one at a time and explore now what they might look like in real life for each of us. And again, softly jotting down in your journal what is standing out for you, what questions are coming to mind, and which one of these ideas resonated the most with you.
In my opinion, this issue of identity and misidentification is the single most challenging issue that humans are facing today. The idea of taking the identity that emerged from culture, our birth, our familial patterning, our cultural societal patterning. I mean, like I say, I think of the three of us here, all three of us, children of either immigrants or not born in America people, And each one of us have so many similarities, but so many differences. And I think it's one of the most magnificent things to be here with you two and experience the contrasts and the simultaneous similarities that are within each of us. It's magical.
Love it. Thank you, Colin. Anything coming up for you, Archana?
A lot. I mean, I think I think it's actually amazing that Colin, that you're reading the great work of, of your life. I think this is just a lot of bridges, a lot of bridges. I felt like I was crossing bridges. And I was listening to the book, and it was just, a lot of aha, but a lot of like, yes, like exhalations, like God, that felt good for him to be able to say that, for him to utter that freedom, and that discomfort. And I just love how, it's that kind of like, I'm going to settle into this. Like I felt like I was going to settle into this, like, and like, finally, like this. Oh, I see what people. This to me is like I get it when people say, "Oh, in my 50s, I'm as I am." I'm settling in my skin finally, or I feel like that's what it, and then coming home to that phenomenally, right? And I am now, again, back to like that embodied inquiry. That seems to be thematically what's going on for me. And I think this book, resonated in that in that connection. Like again, connecting the dots. So thank you again, Maggie. Just wondrous, really, everything you're doing. And again, this wondrous connection of all these points. And I see continuity in that evolution, unfolding, and the beauty and the mystery of all of that, and the alchemy of us being here, the three of us, and so, yeah, truly magical. I agree,
I
Colin,
love it.
magical.
I mean, we can just stop now, right? It's like, but we talked last time about acculturation. Remember in the Latinas Bible, it's like, do we acculturate into a culture or do we assimilate? And so in the book, Stephen talks about his experience of going to the Kripalu Center for yoga. He just wanted to go for like a month. And then he ended up staying 4 months. And his friends were like starting to freak out, saying, what's happening to you? And so what Urchina was saying was like, settling in, when we can get through that threshold of the old and starting to be more curious about where I'm going and more of the authenticity of what we're discovering in this journey, then we can settle in and now be open and curious. So with that, I love that. So let's move into big idea number one. So the idea number one is we are not broken. We are misidentified. So in this book, we start to look at the roles and the thoughts and the ways that we identify ourselves, the achievements, our personality, even our thoughts and emotions. We might even hear ourselves say, oh, that's not like me. It's like, who is that me that we are kind of creating? And so what Cope introduces us to is what yoga has actually been teaching for thousands of years. And it's that there are actually just surface layers of the self when we look at this kind of false sense of identity. They're not real, and it's not the whole picture. So when we take that time to pause, we can start to then look at and what he describes as the false self, the version of us that gets constructed over time, shaped by expectations, culture, and experience. And again, it's not necessarily bad. It's actually necessary for us to function in the world, right? We can't be just thinking about self 100% of the time. We have to get out and be on automatic pilot in order to not drain our minds or those around us, right? But the problem comes when we believe that's all we are, because underneath that, there's something deeper, more stable, and already whole. And so this creates a powerful reframe. Instead of asking, what's wrong with me? Why am I like this? Or I wish I could be this. We begin to get curious and ask, where might I be misidentified? So we actually take a step back. In yoga, it's called that pratyahara, stepping back from the embroilment or being embroiled in the emotional pool of in that experience and being curious and asking, where might I be misidentified? So, in that gap that we're allowing ourselves to explore, it's amazing. For me, this connects deeply to the idea of returning to center, stopping the outward spiral and choosing to say, I'm going to pause and I'm going to just be curious. Allow myself to not pursue that urge to try to become someone new, even if it's a positive intention, right? But what would happen if instead our focus is remembering who we are beneath all that noise? And even in my work with positive intelligence, we talk about how our saboteurs just simply distort our perception. So, again, it's not that we're broken, it's that we're seeing ourselves through a distorted lens. And the work becomes gently just to clear that lens, just to clear the lens. We're not changing anything, just can we perceive a little bit more clearly? So, again, the root of suffering in yoga is that mistaken identity, as Colin just said. So, let's open it back up to see what some ideas are coming up for you, our listeners, writing down what is standing out for you.
This uh, commentary, the statement, the root of suffering, mistaken identity, is the essence of what I was brought to in my own life in 1993, 1994, when uh, I went through some really profound awakening experiences, and my identity went from a very well established sense of self to this amorphous, not sure of anything anymore perspective. And I call it rapture that led to rupture. You've heard me say stuff like this before, but I was ruptured, man, and I had no idea how to defrag myself, and just listening to you speak and going back in time. Oh, how this book could have helped me. Oh my God. Seriously. I just think, oh my God, to have words like this that could have given me the structure, because that's, Maggie, that's the one thing that I've started to realize is that this this self that we have constructed and is the root of our suffering, that because it's in dissonance with or out of harmony with who we really are, the deeper the dissonance, the deeper the suffering. The greater the alignment and harmony, the greater the joyful tension of life. And so just sitting here and imagining, 30 plus years ago, what that might have been like. It makes me really grateful that humans like him and like yourself, who are so passionate about sharing these things with others. I'm just glad I'm just glad you exist.
I'm glad you exist. It's this mirror where we awaken. It's the book is so full of these ideas. We're just scratching the surface, literally, on these ideas. And identity is critical to how we are moving through every single day, right, Colin? We talk about the 60 to 80,000 thoughts that we're having every day. And in the book, he goes into detail on just thinking about we're constantly in this self-construction mode, whether we know it or not. So he says, get in the game, become a participant, and choose those thoughts, feelings, and actions that are actually, like you said, congruent with what makes you feel blissful. What makes you come alive? What makes you feel, you know, just pure radiance coming from you? These are signals that tell our mind from the rest of our intelligence, whether it's our body intelligence, our intuitive intelligence, our creative intelligence, that we are on the path in alignment with our true self. So these are the little breadcrumbs from our soul. And it's a tool, it's a book that reminds us that we have the capacity to look for those and to follow them. And how much more amazing would life be if we just did that more often?
Well, I'm grateful for both of you and for Stephen's book. And likewise, Colin, I felt like when I, started listening to this book, and I was like, where was this book when I needed it? Like, a couple of, but then I think back and I'm like, well, I think Maggie, um, you know, uh, it's been a couple of years since you and I embarked, on a journey together of learning, and I'm so grateful to you for introducing me to all these books that you brought into my path, which helped me point me to a path where I felt like this process of um, really reacquainting myself, recognizing myself as Maggie, yours, my true nature.
Mhm.
And the fact that you have held space, Maggie, and I'm so grateful to you, with, and asked me to put on my lab coat. And which I'm so grateful to do. And at the same time, I love that there's a playfulness because I think that's, for me, that is very much aligns with my nature. So I feel more at home being playful and, experimenting and let's try this, and then to listen to what Stephen was saying, and I was just like, then Colin, you said that you mentioned the Gita earlier. For me, it was like, I felt like I was with Colin. Like, I mean, I was with, I feel like that way when the three of us are together, like we're on this perch and we're kind of like looking out into the vastness and like, oh, and we're recognizing each other, honoring each other. And I kind of felt like when I started listening to this book, like I felt like I was on that perch that he talked about in the Berkshires, and not from a place of like, where, as he talks about how like property and how people could buy, that perch that, but more in terms of, how lucky are we when we truly are aligned in purpose and in timing of things, and then that we're present with each other on these perches where that they're just like, there's a spiritual awakening, recognition. So for me, this reminded me of like, I felt like it was like a moment of like Gita, like I could see that, and that conversation, that cosmic conversation. So I think for me, it was definitely really magical, but at the same time, like, wow, this, I think this is what Maggie and I've been working on with you, Maggie, personally, from my vantage point. Like, I see it now. So unfolding. And there's a comfort in that misidentification, but identifying with my true nature
Yeah,
all along.
I'm so glad you brought that up. He does share so many of those beautiful lived experiences, right? The insights that come alive, especially related to place. We talk about the environment as being a part of the container, right? On our journey in life. And he talks about this idea of experience of complete well-being. So when he pauses right at there and he connects with everything, and it's that experience, that embodied awareness of what he relates to and connects to truth and authentic self, and letting go of all of the false veils of trying to hold up the wrong mansion of self. So what happens when we let go of all of the energy and time and emotional turmoil of trying to build that wrong mansion of ourselves and just let ourselves be comfortable in our own skin, right? So much of that. He shares so many beautiful quotes and other authors, other spiritual leaders, philosophers, that it's a book really, that will benefit so many. So wonderful.
I yeah, and I think that's the other thing. You know, uh, it's interesting because the authors you've chosen, the books that you've chosen, I think are really elegant and eloquent. I don't know how else to put it, but there's a certain eloquence and an ease with that these authors just bring and I think each of them are tied to nature, right? And there's a very sort of like a nurturing learning environment, like this container that I feel like that's very, but there's such eloquence to it and elegance to it. And I think that's the other thing where I'm like, I think in identifying with our true nature, with our true selves, there should be an ease, there should be an eloquence, there should be
Mm.
an elegance of this is who my soul, elegantly, eloquently really wants to share with the world. This is when I am in true presence, and I think part of that is also if you're authentic and if the journey, the process, and you're true to that, right? I mean, I think then there's an ease that you can go through different, in terms of the phenomenal world orbits of your life. That the true, you know, you found, you connected with that truth and that self truth. Um, and I think the closer you get, and that it requires embodied inquiry, it requires digging, it requires, rupturing, literally taking out, and then maybe replanting in different environments. I feel that's happened to me. I'm in a totally different environment. I am now, close to the ocean, the Pacific Ocean, no less. It is a different way of being. And I'm finding that I'm at ease with it. At first I was like, I don't know if I can do it, but I'm like, I actually like this. And I like this, it's a reacquaintance with nature in a way, a
Yeah.
different force of nature.
Yeah. Thank you for pointing that out. And what I'd love to point back to the book about is that he shares so much of the yoga philosophy, which we don't have time to get into all the yoga philosophy. But what you're pointing to is this dance, right? There's the idea of Shiva and Shakti in small s's, the energies of consciousness and then matter and energy. And so when we, at any time in life where we are feeling wobbly, it's just to be step back and say, where am I? Am I too much thought and consciousness and not enough action and groundedness? Or am I all just about the job and doing the thing and forgetting my connection? And so it's that interplay. And so the yoga we do on the mat, you know, is a part of this, a beautiful practice of being a participant in the consciousness flow from pure consciousness to pure matter. And that we, as these human beings, have a divine aspect to ourself is always there. And so the journey back to center is to open that treasure chest. And as Viktor Frankl says, it's those are the gems of our soul, of our spirit. So let's open the treasure chest. Let's take in the beauty of our own essence that is always there. So this speaks beautifully into the big idea number two. So the second big idea, the identity project, builds directly on the first. And for many of us, it's where things really start to click. Stephen describes something we might call this identity project. And when you hear that phrase, it's actually very intuitive, right? You know what it is. It's identity and it's kind of a ongoing thing, right? Most of us, whether we realize it or not, are constantly working on constructing and maintaining a sense of like who we are through possibly our careers, our accomplishments, how others see us, and even the stories we tell ourselves in our internal dialogue and the stories we share with others. We're also trying to become maybe someone else, whether it's our future self or trying to become like someone else to emulate. And again, there's nothing inherently wrong with that. And he points out that that's just a part of how we function in the world. But over time, this can turn into kind of an ongoing performance with a view and an emphasis on the external aspect of life and a focus on achievement identity. So we start to feel like we have to keep it all together, keep achieving, keep proving ourselves. And that can create a lot of pressure and often a quiet sense of disconnection because we're relating to an image instead of to what's truly in the moment. And this is where yoga introduces a very different orientation, what he's referring to as the reality project. So instead of asking, who should I be? Or how do I become more successful, more impressive, and more put together? We begin to ask, what is actually true right now? What am I experiencing? What matters here? So just notice if there was a shift in your focus and from an orientation of performing identity to maybe a sense of being in reality. They talk a lot in yoga about be here, be now. And this is the practice that helps us to really enliven those lessons, those ideas, the guidelines. And I love this idea that sometimes we mistake the vehicle for the destination. And it goes into that. We can go into that in discussion in just a little bit, but we think that the identity we're building is the goal, when in reality, it may just be the thing that's keeping us from ourselves. And this connects so beautifully to the work we've been exploring, right? Around achievement identity versus creative identity. We talk a lot about in positive intelligence about these saboteurs, these inner dialogues as are driven patterns. And here in this space, it's about the concept of how can we remember, to return to center. Because when we're constantly just performing, keeping up that McMansion of myself, we're usually not fully present. And the invitation here is not to drop everything and walk away from life. You don't have to be a recluse and live in a cave, but to begin relating to it differently. To shift from how do I appear to maybe asking and just being curious, what is true? So again, we often mistake the identity we've built for who we truly are. Okay, my friends. So identity project versus reality project. How do we step into this? How often do we pause to really even get to know where we are? Where are we focusing on? Building that McMansion of self or being curious as to what is showing up right now?
This identity project, I love how he calls out and how you highlighted the contrast between outcome and the way I look at it is process. We are, as soon as we start to ossify or harden our identity, we are, in my opinion, asking for trouble. We're signing up for a crash, and I have crashed again and again and again. But I'm finally at a point anymore where, and you know, you've heard a lot about my life and what I do, and the great thing about my two sons is they do not allow ossification of identity. they they uh they take your ego and just, like, I don't know if you remember the Flintstones and Bam Bam. They just grab your ego and go bam, 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 bam. I have lived I have lived like that for 30 plus years. Someday I'll tell you some fun stories. But anyway, my point is that there's just so much wisdom in what you're sharing here, Maggie. So thank you.
That's always great to understand how much our identity is interrelated to our environment, includes people around us. So,
Yeah, really. I think that's especially when I love the fact that you cited the Flintstones and Bam Bam. That, that resonated with me. Um, especially in a culture where, you know, we value reinvention, the makeover, Um, and that's like it's almost like I feel like the game of like, or it's like jump rope. I kind of feel like, do I go back in there again? Do I go back into the hustle culture? Am I ready for this again? Am I ready? Am I ready to be that performer again? You know, and it then does become roles. Like what's the next role I'm going to play or something. And it can lead to role fatigue. Not up for it anymore, just tired. I'm tapping out. Um, and then there's an element of like, well, is that because you're a loser because you've lost it? Have you lost touch with, your metal, what you're made of? Have you, or did you never have it to begin with? Is it all a farce, right? Keeping up appearances, all of it. And then there's a part that's getting back to like, what he said in terms of true self, when you're just like, no, I'm going to tap into something else. Um, and it's going to be and it's a risk. It's definitely a risk because you might find something that you didn't even you know or you may have to face something, or it's mirroring something that you're not prepared to recognize, let alone forget about embracing it, but like, who is that person? And I think that's where for myself, I like this idea of like, the reality project. um and there is an oscillation of I'm here, I'm there, um and we're all kind of like factories. We're back to work, and it's like, no, we're going to come out with a new one, or we're going to try this new path or whatever. I don't know, I feel like that's what it is. It's this. And then you think to yourself, is this really, how much of this is this the industry, the industriousness, of our phenomenal world, of our being, and what's required in order to function in the phenomenal world, and how much of this is like really truly tapping into the ingenuity of who we are, or as I call it, our DNA, our divine natural abilities. So I've been working on that. That's my reality project. What are my truly divine, what are my divine natural abilities? What if I just relinquished this need to impress?
Yeah.
um
I love that, right? The curiosity really refers to Freud a lot in some of the philosophical discussions. And this is really interesting when we talk about in our work. We look at work, um, love, and energy. Energy is the newest one, but in traditional psychotherapy in the beginning, it was only looking at sort of like work and love. And I never really knew why they looked at those two. And guess what? He pointed it out here. He said, in Freud, this is where we look for ourselves in work and in love. So if you think about that, how much of what you just shared was like the work, how do we express ourselves in the work that we do? And it's no coincidence that our hands are what we work with, right? And they're connected to our heart. So the more we connect from our heart and work from our heart and do our work with our hands, then more likely we're actually going to be in tune with what is his name? Washburn says we are then more effective in growing an effective personhood. So there's so much that this book guides for us, saying that there is actually a cartography. Where was that? A yoga cartography with the sheets, the yoga sheets. So if you've ever heard of that, you guys, the gross body, the subtle body, the astral body, and the anomaya kosha, the pranamaya kosha, the manomaya kosha, vijnanamaya kosha, and anandamaya kosha. These are all sheaths, kind of like the Russian nesting dolls, but they appear in sort of this holographic all in the same time. And these are aspects of ourselves. And guess what? When we learn about these, he says they are like a sequential order of how we undo the false self. And everything starts with the first one, which is avidya, right? And
so
that's
avidya meaning non-knowledge.
yes. So we don't know our true self. But again, we can go into it, but there is a sequencing, my friends. Isn't this amazing that for thousands of years they have been practicing this, embodying this, and saying over and sharing this wisdom? It used to be in oral traditions, and it used to only be passed down from one teacher to one student. So now we have wisdom at the press of a button. But the point here is that it's not about the knowingness. It's about taking that map and putting it into action in our own effective personhood. So amazing, you guys. Again, we are just scratching the surface on just all of the amazing thoughts. Let me pause and just see if there are any other comments before we go to the next idea. Letting it land.
You brought me back to some of my first lessons that I learned. And in my, as you know, I'm writing a lot now on Substack, and the conversation that I'm in most of the time is about identity and about how our capacity to shift perspectives. So in psychology, they call it perspective flexibility. Now, I was unaware of that idea until I started using the phrase permeable identity. And that's where I found a crossover. And it's interesting because I had not connected it to the sheaths, the yogic sheaths that I had learned about once before. But now suddenly, as you brought them up, I can immediately see this deep wisdom, this deep ancient wisdom. They were already teaching perspective flexibility, which in psychology is deemed to be a really high functional level. When you start to move into that place where you can at will shift perspectives, it's in psychology deemed to be a next level kind of participation in life. And all of a sudden it hit me when you said that. I was like, oh my God, they've been teaching perspective flexibility in yoga for millennia.
Thank you, Colin. It's that witnessing, right? He calls it the witnessing. So being able to stand as the seer and watching yourself in life. And here in Western society, we know that as job shadowing. So imagine someone's following you all day, on the job. How do you show up? We show up differently when we're being perceived. So why don't we do that for ourselves? It's a really fun thing to do, thinking about that. So yeah, Elvin Semrod was the noted psychologist who came up with the term reality project. So he goes into the amazing work. I guess he was really well known in the field of psychology. And he also goes in to share about the difference of the questions we ask ourselves. So instead of the why questions, he says the why questions keep us up here in the ego aspect, right? And more of like that Shiva consciousness, right? And he says, now what we need more to balance that is more of the what questions. The what questions are connected to more of these nature of the moment. What am I feeling now? And things like that. So, really thinking about even the questions we ask ourselves point us to a certain perspective. And to your point, Colin, how flexible can we get in our perspective? And they go into talking about Tantra yoga. Oh my gosh, you guys, we don't have time to talk. Maybe we'll go into next time. But the Vedanta, right? And how that gets into the different ways we look at oneness, our perspective of oneness, that can also differ. So let's move into our last idea for just today. For the third idea, this is where everything starts to come together. Suffering is not the problem, it's actually the threshold. Because once we begin to see that we're not broken and that we may be living inside an identity that we've constructed, the next question becomes, what do we do with the discomfort that starts to surface? And he beautifully outlines how, at least in the Kripalu Yoga Center, they take more of a tantric yoga approach where they're viewing the body itself as a gateway back to ourselves. And again, honoring there are many different perspectives, many different traditions, but in this book, they're focusing on the Tantra yoga perspective. And I know that brings up a lot of things for people, but maybe we can get into that in the discussion. But let's look at these basic ideas. For many of us, that discomfort can look like stress, restlessness, dissatisfaction, a sense that something isn't quite right, right? And our instinct, of course, is what? We want to fix it or avoid it or distract ourselves, right, from it. Unfortunately, our lifestyles really kind of help us, and it's really easy to just stay busy, to distract ourselves, or try to get back to a feeling of in control. But what Stephen Cope shares with us from the many wisdom traditions, he really suggests something very different. That, in fact, it's this discomfort is not the problem. It's actually just a signal, a flag, a kind of invitation, a threshold, if you will. Because often that discomfort is showing us that something we've been holding on to no longer fits, or an identity we've been living from is starting to crack, or that we're being asked to look a little deeper. And instead of immediately trying to fix it or escape it, can we begin to do a different way of responding? The practice becomes, can we instead just be with that feeling, sensation, emotion? Can we just listen to what's going on in our own internal dialogue? And this, Stephen guides us to see, is where the body becomes so important, a critical foundational first step, because so much of our lives are now, especially in the AI reality, now we live in our heads, right? We're thinking, we're analyzing, we're planning. We've got 3 or 4 different gizmos up at the same time as we're getting inputs, right? The body is always in the present moment through breath, sensation, movement. So if we look at these, what's included with suffering, we might look at discomfort, we might look at suffering itself. And then this idea of extroversion is what we were just talking about, this idea to avoid and distract and pull ourselves out from our center. And that has tended to be what we're doing. And now we're looking at the body and that honoring that for thousands of years, yogis, yoginis have practiced and experienced this return back to center. That realizing that allowing ourselves to spend more time in that discomfort that you're feeling is not something to avoid, that in fact, at some point, it guides you toward your next level of clarity. And for me, this connects deeply to the idea that the disappointment, the friction, even the pain can become fertile ground for growth. Not because we want it, but because of how we choose to respond to what life is bringing to us. So, what if discomfort is not something to fix, but something to listen to? So, thinking about this, thinking about our own ways of discomfort, we may not even realize how often we're suffering. And we always talk about this idea of the difference, right, between the physical pain and the emotional pain. And there is a big difference, and we forget, right? So, physical pain, we are almost hardwired to respond to physical pain. So, imagine your hand is on a hot stove. You almost don't even think about it. Your body's going to take that hand off, right? Immediately, don't even think about it. But how often do we keep our hand on the hot stove of a hot emotion, something that we're uncomfortable with, right? And we keep our hand there. We haven't yet built the neural biological circuitry to take our hand off those discomfort emotions. In fact, we turn to self-soothing mechanisms by that self-dialogue, by listening to the false self, by creating those environments that keep us in that safe container of our false self. So when we think about that, when discomfort shows up for us, what do? Most of us distract or numb. Those are the ways, those are the pathways. They're so easy. And, that's what we do because there's nothing else to guide us. But with the yoga, there is definitely a practice and there is a pathway to transcend. So just curious, what helps you come back into your body? You can do a self-reflection here if you're listening. What helps you come back into your body or into the present moment? And how are you feeling, right?
Um, just listening to what you've just shared, it threw me immediately into the moment that I realized that I had been experiencing deep subconscious emotional suffering and I had no awareness of number one, the cause, and number two, I didn't understand that the felt discomfort was not the norm. It was not how I should be living. That in fact, this felt discomfort had arisen from early in my childhood, from times when I had felt not seen, not heard, maltreated, um, whatever. And I had just lived with the energy of it, thinking this is just the way life is. And I can tell you, as a young father and a husband and a businessman and all these things, that the first time I experienced what I call powerful peace, that moment of freedom from that subconscious discomfort, it was a game changer. I didn't understand it. I didn't know what had happened, but for about 3 weeks, I got complete respite from that deep subconscious emotional pain. So just listening to you talk about taking your hand off, what if your hand's been on there since you were a little kid and you just thought that's the way it's supposed to feel? That's what happened to me. And when it came off, and I was like, oh my God, this is awesome. And then seriously, it was like, I could just feel my system not being able to handle the new capacity. And my hand went right back on that damn stove, man. And I've spent the last 30 years trying to figure out how to pull it off. So anyway, I've in all the time, because as you know, I've been through PQ. I've heard that phrase over and over and over again. I've studied, I've read a ton of psychology books. All of a sudden the realization is, in my opinion, it's not the suffering that we're aware of. It's the suffering that we're carrying within ourselves that we just think is normal. That, in my opinion, is the real work.
Absolutely. Thank you for bringing that up, Colin. The realization, again, it's the embodied experience, your lived experience of these truths and wisdom in your body physically. And that points to a lot of what is in current lifestyle medicine is the idea of ACEs, adverse childhood events, and how they predispose adults in their later years, in their 40s and 50s, when the seeds of disease that were planted in the youth are then blooming because of all of the stress in the aging body or whatnot, epidemiology. And so you're right. What do we assume is normal? And how do we allow ourselves these retreats from our normal environment and ways of living to then notice a difference? And so, again, thousands of years ago, the people in India would go on retreats, many wisdom traditions actually, to do a week or a two to retreat at the seasonal change and to do panchakarma, to do the cleansing actions of the mind and the body, so that we kind of return back to our normal and notice what you just shared, the difference of a relaxed body, a cleaner body inside with a digestion, a cleaner mind, and remembering some of the practices that keep us more in that healthier, balanced state. So these are just missing, right? These are missing from most of our social norms, cues, or even environments. You have to go to a different country or go to a retreat. And so in the book, he talks about that the bodies are biocomputers. In yoga, we've always known the five senses are like the gateway to the inner pharmacy. So hearing, seeing, smelling, tasting, touching, these are all sensory doorways where we are gathering information. But like Colin said, are we aware? Are we paying attention to the messages that are being received by the external inputs, or how we are holding our body in the posture of tension from just carrying that emotional weight? So good, so good.
Yeah, such powerful shares. I mean, thank you for that, both of you. Um, that awareness of, uh, you know, how we embody suffering. How long have we been embodying it? And I think it's interesting for me as a parent. Um, I'm acutely aware of it for each of my children and trying to figure out how do I help them be aware um, that they have other choices, that they don't necessarily have to embody suffering. How do I help them tap into that awareness? And then there's a part of me that wonders, well, what about my own journey? How much of my identity was informed by suffering, and that textured richness of that, um, and call it karma, call it whatever, was I fated to, and then amore fati. I mean, just, love what I have and, what I've, my, my life so far, and embrace the fate I've been given. But with heightened awareness, with possibly this, the sheets and, if I'm truly on this quest, right. And I'm ready for the next level. And then as a parent, going back into my identity as a parent, maybe for myself, that embodied inquiry means I go through this gateway first. I tap into it. And at the end of the day, my children are looking at me, whether they choose to or not consciously, as role model. How do I, and then part of that is this inner conflict of like, well, should I be a role model in the phenomenal world? Should I, as a businesswoman, pursue, next level performer stuff, or is it more in terms of, embodied inquiry and on a spiritual, like settling in, foundational, so there was this sort of, um, material, immaterial, conflict, inner conflict. So I think that's where I'm hoping to find, you know, um, a path forward, but doing it for greater good for my family, for myself, but also for my family. And then showing my children that there is inquiry at any age. There should be inquiry. There should be, and that I'm still becoming aware of myself, and, and truly embracing parts of me that I didn't necessarily embrace before. So I think that's the other thing where it's like, I'm letting this process inelegantly sometimes, unfold, and then finding, an authenticity in that, and then just saying, at least this is authentic, me being authentic. My children are seeing, the conflict, my body, in conflict in terms of things that I'm inquiry and things that I'm going through in my very body at this moment as it's going through changes, right? And then just taking them along for that journey and showing them that I'm uh, trying to live in courage, trying to live authentically, trying to find solutions, trying to be playful with it, and take the suffering as it comes, having a sense of humor, and all of those things. But that's me truly at my embracing my essence, my nature.
I love that. Thank you, Richina. Thank you, Colin. And as you're speaking about that, something the author brought into the book is this concept of the idea of the seeds of the self are planted in us, in our divine self. And in order for them to blossom, guess what he says? They can only blossom with others. in relationship. That's why we're here, my friends, today, right here with you in this discussion, sharing ideas, reflecting, mirroring, saying, not this, not this. The discernment for that responsible personhood development. That yoga is, in fact, living in action and applying that therapeutic split that Colin was mentioning earlier on, and leaving you with an idea that we are possibilities in disguise. We're just waiting to blossom that full, authentic expression of who we are now in our essence. Not being anybody else, but being, like Urchina was sharing, dawning that curiosity of how else can I explore this? How else can I be a role model? And with my actions, pave that pathway back to center, to my more true, authentic self. So, my friends, thank you so much for sharing those tidbits. Again, we can stay here forever, and we've only covered not even half of the book. Oh my gosh, we might have to do 3 sessions on this one book. So, let's go ahead and do a quick wrap up of the 3 ideas. Let's do a quick wrap up of the 3 big ideas that we talked about today. A path back to the true self. Number one, we're not broken. The number one pain and suffering in life from the yoga perspective is that we're simply misidentified, living from a sense of that false self, right? Second, that much of our lives can become an identity project. Paying attention to how our culture is giving us the cues and the rewards of focusing on that achievement identity, right? When we're trying to construct and maintain who we think we should be instead of living from what is actually true. And third, that the discomfort we're often trying to avoid may actually be a threshold, a doorway into deeper awareness. And that one of the most powerful ways back is, in fact, through the body, through breath, presence, and our own direct experience. So when we hold all of these together and begin to see that this journey is not about becoming someone new, but about returning to who we already are. So with that, let's go ahead and do our final reflection. So as we're wrapping up, just reflecting, self-reflecting, where in your life might you be ready to return to what feels more real? Just noting that down through the ideas that we covered, the McMansion myself that we're creating, the people that we're around, and the curiosity that we're bringing around what is already present in our life. So, as we begin to close, I'd love to just circle back to our amazing thought partners and just check in and see what might have landed with you the most. What's a big idea or a big surprise that might have come out from our discussion today?
Well, as usual, this has evoked a lot of expansion in just my worldview is from of myself, and that these ideas, while not necessarily new, um, as they've been brought forth together in this grouping, which I've never had before, has shown new places for me to explore, new ways for me to contemplate my own self. And I love the fact, Maggie, that you brought this to the pinnacle of it only happens in relationship. You know, when I first went through my expansion process and my moment of experiential oneness that I had over and over again in 94 and 95. It was soon after that for the first time I had heard about the yogis in the Himalayas who would retire to a cave and just be in that state. This has been like sitting in a cave with a couple of really good friends and talking about things that are really, really, really important. So thank you.
Thank you, Colin. I love that. Urchin, any
I
final
love that. I love the
thoughts?
cave. I am always happy to retreat into the cave with you, you know. That's the other thing in terms of going on retreat and retreating. Um, and that's the thing. Imagine going on a retreat or going on pilgrimages, which we spoke of earlier. And as a Hindu, I've not been practicing going on pilgrimages for a long time. So I feel like this is a year. This is a pivotal year for myself and my family because for the first time, I'm hoping to travel abroad with my children, hoping to go back to their father's ancestral land, London, not India, but hoping to go to their mother's ancestral land, India, hopefully at the end of the year. So I thought, well, let me take them, let me transport them, ourselves, each of ourselves, to this other time and place where their roots come from, their their father's roots, celebrate them, recognize them, see the complexity in them. He was born in London as to immigrant mother in London, and that's where his grandfather transplanted roots, and then take him to my ancestral land of India in New Delhi. That's where I was born, and really hoping that this pivotal year will contribute to their and inform their identity, their but hopefully in some way sparing them of things that they don't necessarily have to go through, and yet at the same time not taking away from the enrichment that comes with suffering. And it could be suffering. I don't mean like in terms of like they have to suffer like some trauma, but I mean in terms of like questions, on the not knowing. And instead of stewing in it, let's swim in it. Let's not drown in it. Let's enjoy. Let's go on an adventure together. And I can't help it. And there was a part of me that's like, come on, Archana, life is not a joke. This is not, you're so, I don't know if it's denial or is it the fact that I'm playful and that's my true nature, that I find comfort in the playfulness of life, right? Krishna, at the end of the day, in the Gita, as much as he embodies, and is the North Star for the soul, right? He is at the end of the day a playful creature. That's who I met Krishna as a child. Krishna's Janmashtami, which is celebrated in August, is a Hindu festival that I, as a child, look forward to, as I did with Holi, which is a festival of colors. Janmashtami is Krishna's birthday, and the idea is to become one with Krishna, the playfulness, baby Krishna, who, when his mother opened his mouth, saw the universe in her. Yeah. So I am hoping to be playful with my children this pivotal year, as we each discover playfully, pause and pivot, and hopefully, discover something about ourselves.
Real world application. I think that's what the author continued to come back to, applying this. And for me, I just love the return to the body as the number one step. And that there's this cartography. Me, I just love maps. So it's the idea of, oh, there's a map. There's this idea. It's almost like a treasure chest, but it's leading us back to our core. And we're here as the potentiality. Even in psychology, right? Abraham Maslow is like, we are here to be that which we can be. Okay. So thank you both. As always, I appreciate your presence, your shares, your amazing reflections, the authentic and the vulnerability of just showing up with how we're thinking and how we're showing up in our day-to-day thoughts, feelings, and actions. It's really that part of what makes this space so meaningful. As we said, it's not just about reading these amazing books or about the ideas that are brought into it, really. It's about how we experience them together, what it brings up for us together in this day-to-day activity that we call life. So today we explored what it means to question the identity we've built. We begin to see more clearly and relate differently to the discomfort we experience. And again, not as something to avoid anymore, but with that curiosity as something that might be guiding us back to ourselves. And if there's one thread that runs through all of it, it's this idea of returning to center, right? From out there back to center. Not becoming someone new, but allowing ourselves to remember who we are beneath all that noise. So as you move through your workday, grabbing your journal or your notes, just writing down what might sit with you. Where in your life might you be ready to return what feels more real and more true? There's a pandemic of disassociation with our feelings and emotions, or even ability to feel empathy for ourselves and for others, especially for caretakers and nurses and counselors and all of these helping professions. And even yoga says the pathway is to remember through the body, to feel, to answer those what questions. What is going on? What am I feeling? So remembering that and just reflecting. And this is just the beginning of the conversation, my friends. This week, we just focused on parts 1 and 2 of the book, where we're just focusing on these ideas. So next week, join us and we'll expand and continue our coverage of this book to include awareness, concepts like equanimity. What the heck does that even mean? And again, continuing with the idea of the body in the journey, and share some more of Stephen Cope's experience at the Kripalu Institute and the transformation that happens in some of these spaces where transformation happens for people. We'll talk about that. Really, really key ideas. I can't wait to share that with you. So if this resonated with you today, we'd love for you to come back and join us again next week. So on behalf of our co-hosts, Colin and Urchina, thank you all for being here with us today on the Pause and Pivot Cafecito Cafe. If this conversation spoke to you, we'd love for you to please share it with someone, just one person who might need it, who might want to join in on the conversation. And most importantly, give yourself space to simply pause and read more books. Because from that pause, from that insight, we begin to pivot toward what really matters. So thank you for joining Pause and Pivot. Until next time. Bye-bye.